Hey, welcome to Expanded Knowledge. In this video, we're going to talk about something called the Kalahari Retreivals, about an alleged UFO crash retrievals. This is a topic a little less talked about and known in UFO circles, and the source of this is what you see right here, a book called Life with a Cosmos Clearance, which was published in 2003 by somebody named Daniel M. Salter. Now, I originally was put onto this personally after listening to a podcast on Michael Sala's channel here, where he had Daniel Salter's two grandsons come on the show and speak about this book. And this was just last year. And these two gentlemen have been currently investigating all the stories and the claims of their grandpa. And in the podcast, it's pretty interesting to listen to. They talk about how he told them all these stories and swore by it all and was always speak about it with his family. And they do seem rather neutral and objective from what I remember in the interview, in that they are not jumping to conclusions and saying everything he said was true, but they're trying to kind of systematically figure out what he knew and what was true. And being family members, they've been able to obtain certain documents and papers, and some of them have corroborated Daniel Salter's claims that he makes in this book. And one of the things that I do recall is that they were able to verify that he did have top secret crypto clearances at the positions that he worked at. And Daniel Salter, he worked at high levels in the Air Force, high levels also in the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office. That's where David Grush also worked. And he was allegedly involved with a team that would basically go out and try to persuade people that they didn't have the sightings that they saw. This was in the Project Blue Book era. And, be involved with that. So the other thing is that before that, he actually was one of the witnesses, and that's him there, really the only picture you can find online. He was one of the witnesses of the Disclosure Project in 2001, Stephen Greer, at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. So he was one of the guys that went out there with a pretty credible group of people, pretty historic moment, and, Edgar Mitchell and so forth. So Daniel Salter was one of these witnesses. And so he's an interesting source in that he did work, as verified through documentation with his grandsons, he did work and top secret crypto clearance levels within the National Reconnaissance Office in the U.S. Air Force. And, he claims he had what's called a Cosmos clearance. That's why his book's called Life with a Cosmos Clearance. And you read this book and it's very interesting. I read the whole book. It's one of those books that I read in like one sitting. And he brings out like a bunch of wild conspiracy theories that he seems to be convinced about. And so I guess you never really know with this kind of information, but I am always open-minded to everything. And certainly when it's a source like this, somebody who worked in a high level, what are they talking about that might be true? So in this show today here, we're going to actually look at his chapter on the Kalahari Retreivals, and we're going to just read the highlights together to get reacquainted with it. So I actually forget. I vaguely remember that they were in South Africa and so forth. So here we go. The Kalahari Retreivals. Official military documents indicate that a 60-foot spacecraft entered South American airspace at 1:45 p.m. on May 7th, 1989. And was intercepted by two Mirage jet fighters using an experimental laser cannon. Okay? The craft and its two surviving extraterrestrial crew members were removed to a secret Air Force base. And then a retrieval team came from the United States, and a C-5 Galaxy transport vehicle took the craft and the two extraterrestrial beings back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So apparently the commander of this spaceship was named Akon and had for many years been visiting a South African woman named Elizabeth Klarer. Okay. And there is, I guess this is a drawing. I mean, I can't imagine that that's a real photo. But in any event, I guess that's what it might have looked like. And something that they found out was that anti-gravitational electromagnetic propulsion and pulse beam laser weaponry, apparently these were being given by the United States to Taiwan. And there was televised Senate hearings that said basically that this was happening, this pulse beam weapon. All right. So here Salter goes on to state, the crash in South Africa was the first time that we recovered a complete spacecraft of extraterrestrial technology all in one piece. Well, I personally find that hard to believe right away at face value, because we've heard other stories. In 1989, was that really the first time, assuming that these crash retrievals it's all true? 89, I mean, we've heard a lot of other stories of full crafts being recovered, so that makes me question. But hey, maybe this is what the information that he got, and so he's reporting it. Maybe it wasn't, but maybe that's how he was read in. Apparently, after the helicopters and ground troops came in and the South African military examined the craft, and then they called in the U.S. government. And there he goes on to say, to my knowledge, this was the first time an extraterrestrial written language had been recovered. And again, you can see in my notes here, like I'm thinking now, that's also hard to believe because of Roswell and so forth, where we had the beams with the hieroglyphs that Jesse Marcel and Jesse Marcel Jr. speak about. Anyway, moving along here, the South African government made a deal with the U.S. that if they gave us everything they had retrieved from the crash, we would support them when they exploded their first atomic bomb. Okay, so apparently made some type of deal like, here, you guys can take this craft because you're better equipped to deal with it, and this is what we want in return. And apparently the U.S. took the craft and two beings who were still alive to Wright-Patterson. This is apparently a drawing of the craft, which, you can see there, pretty interesting if this is real. Apparently, these are gathered from documented sightings sent to the Air Force and the CIA. And here is... Oh, my Kindle closed down there. So bear with me for a moment here. And okay, sorry about that. Oh, it looks like technology is conspiring against us here. You can see all my Kindle books here. All right. Sorry, guys. Ay. Okay. Back to the story, the Kalahari Retreivals. Here's a picture of apparently this woman that this ET from the Kalahari craft, Elizabeth Klarer, was there with someone. She apparently went and talked to Congress. Here's more about the writings on this craft. The symbols have been seen before. In fact, one wall inside the Great Pyramid is covered with them. We have people secretly studying that language from the Great Pyramid. And apparently this Elizabeth Klarer, this woman, apparently talked to Congress was a trained astronomer, well educated, and she had been having these visits in South Africa from 1954 until her death in 1994. And she spread messages that apparently she was being told that to humanity about a higher scientific knowledge that she was receiving. She had an advanced understanding of the structure of the cosmos and the laws of light frequency that could have benefited humanity, science, and our environment. Mentioning here cosmic plasma of eternity. All of creation is light, the key to the universe. So, a pretty interesting stuff there. Light is an intelligent energy which can be thought into existence and substance. It's pretty interesting to think about. And here we get on to this woman and what the U.S. government thought about her. Salter says, the U.S. government knew about her and understood what she was saying. I have read this in the documents pertaining to the Kalahari Retrievals. So, if this guy isn't just making this up for whatever reason that he did, and I don't know, maybe just to sell this book or whatnot, or maybe just losing his mind, maybe he really did read these documents. Then, of course, you have to ask, were the documents disinformation? Who knows? Anyway, he says, after the U.S. military began atomic bomb testing, the extraterrestrials told Klarer that if we continued, we would destroy our planet like they had theirs. We've heard this again and again in UFO literature and lore. The extraterrestrials telling humans that they had a nuclear destruction in their history and trying to warn us to stay away from it. So here it is again. They had no government as such in their world, she told people. Only a group of wise beings known as the Ancient Ones. We've heard that as well, going all the way back to the Theosophical movement of the late 1800s with Madame Blavatsky, Helena Blavatsky, and even with influences before that. And here he goes on to say, I have spoken at length with Don Phillips, who also attended the Disclosure Project. He actually viewed the film footage of Eisenhower and the ET representative taken at an undisclosed site in California. Many have said Edwards Air Force Base, I believe, or Holloman Air Force Base. Commander Graham E. Bethune says that the Orionites came to our planet in April of 1954. Yeah, and what's Edwards? So we've heard this, of course, if you've been around the block in UFO lore, is that Eisenhower had a meeting with ETs, and I wonder this Commander Graham Bethune, what his credibility is and what he really said on the record. Apparently, these extraterrestrials met with President Eisenhower and through the meeting established contact between world governments and the Greys. I've heard it also, you see in my notes here, that other people have said it was Nordic-looking beings, Greys. I mean, maybe one day we'll find out if all these rumors about Eisenhower meeting aliens are true. But moving along here, he goes on to say that about the craft, how they studied it. Biocomputers allowed them to control the ship through their minds and through crystals. We've heard that again. We've heard that in Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, that according to the intelligence he had gathered about what they studied about the craft, it seemed the craft was being controlled mentally through some type of advanced technology, reading thoughts. And I've spoken about this before. I think it makes logical sense. If you could imagine advancing, the more that we're able to map brainwaves and thoughts and so forth and connect it to technology, of course, we want to be able to fly a ship in the air by thinking, turn left, turn right, go up, down, slow down, speed up, rather than, levers and all these gadgets and so forth. So as crazy and science fiction-y as it sounds, I mean, if there are civilizations thousands or millions of years ahead of us, I mean, I think it just makes logical sense. So moving along here, apparently, he talks a little bit about the U.S. government's lenticular reentry vehicle, which apparently it can go into warp speed for interplanetary travel. I mean, this is where it's like, this book was interesting to read because it's like, it's just so out there sometimes. And it just wonder if this guy was, just embellishing, or if maybe just it's that crazy underneath it all. But if you check out the November 2000 issue of Popular Mechanics, you'll be astounded to see a representation of this aircraft. So, I don't know. Check that out. He says, I believe that non-terrestrial governments are completely self-sufficient and have no monetary system. Everyone's needs are met. There's no reason for a class system. Again, this kind of idea of a utopian, kind of a better structured government and civilization. In our context with non-terrestrial beings, we would ask them, who's your God? The answer has always been everything there is. So, similar themes. He goes on to say, Native American people think that we are going from the fourth to fifth dimension. I've spoke at length with the elders of the Hopi, Navajo, Tiwa, Cherokee, and Comanche who shared this knowledge with me. He goes on to say, one would have the knowledge of a 21-year-old adult 2 weeks after birth. This is a void, a literal dimension. When you think something, then it is. So speaking about what it might be like, the consciousness of non-human intelligence might be like, of alleged advanced beings and civilizations, not actually needing a body. A lot of extraterrestrials do not materialize a body. They travel without a ship through particleization. They need a ship only to protect themselves in different dimensions on different planets they visit. So, you wonder if maybe some of this is true. Maybe, we are trying to come to terms with these claims of, as Carl Nell said, there's zero doubt that non-human intelligence is here and is interacting with humanity and other people. Obviously, David Grush's whistleblower claims. So maybe this is some of the information behind it. So he goes on to speak more about this and, going on to say here, their foremost motive is exploration. That is why they're studying the humans and also our environment. Hayam Eshed said the same thing in 2020, that they're part of the reason that they're here and traveling around is they're continuing to kind of scientifically study the fabric of the universe and, get to know that. And so, more information. He says there's apparently a NATO report that says there's 12 races of extraterrestrial. They haven't been here for just a few years, but rather hundreds or maybe thousands of years. Again, you can look at Carl Nell's recent statements alluding to that, other people alluding to the fact that they've been here a long time, Gary Nolan, etc. Are these ET people hostile? Well, if they were hostile with their weaponry, they could have destroyed us a long time ago or could have done some damage. And I think that's always a logical way of thinking about this question. Yes, if they wanted to physically destroy us, they could have already, so they're not hostile in that sense. But I think you can't think of it as like one group, right? Because look at humanity. We're all humans, right? But there's lots of different groups, and some people are very hostile. There are some groups that are very, destructive, and there are also groups of humans that are peaceful and that are benevolent and want the best for others. So it's probably the same with if there exists, other intelligences, extraterrestrial or otherwise, extra dimensional. So I think we have to be open to that. And also the idea that while we may not be being physically destroyed, maybe some hostile or malevolent groups are in more subtle ways colonizing us or controlling us through other means. I think we have to leave all those possibilities open. So wrapping it up here, he mentions the 1954 Greada Treaty, which of course first came out, I believe, in William, what's his name, with Beyond the Pale Horse, that book, which was a big book. The name of him is eluding me at the moment now, actually, but he was a big guy and kind of a big name in coming out with a lot of this information about alleged meetings with aliens and so forth. And he was a Navy officer in some capacity in naval intelligence, and he was speaking about this Greada Treaty. Then that's one of the things that's debated. Was there an agreement with a extraterrestrial group to allow technological... Oh yeah, it was Bill Cooper. Sorry about that. Beyond the Pale Horse with Bill Cooper and alleged agreements, and that the ETs would be able to conduct experiments on humans and so forth. And who knows, and then you look at the Ross Coulthard interview last year with David Grush, Coulthard asking him, have there been agreements and communication with ETs and the U.S. government? And Grush says, this is something that we'd like to get to the bottom of. And then when he was asked that in the hearing, his response was a little different, and he said, well, I can't speak about that in a public setting. And then you look at, for example, what's his name? Paul Hellyer, the Canadian defense minister, and he said that a high-level Air Force officer of the U.S. told him there's been face-to-face meetings. So you wonder about this kind of stuff, and I'm always kind of equally realizing that it could just be this phenomenon of people in the UFO field repeating the same stories that they hear versus there being something to it. I don't really know, and he mentions the cattle mutilations here, saying that the U.S. used laser and plasma rays for their own cattle mutilation experiments. He says nobody ever says anything good about cattle mutilations, but we saved a lot of lives in Vietnam with this extraterrestrial technology for blood transfusion. So that's pretty wild. My note here is $WTF, because I never heard that before, that the cattle mutilations, or at least part of them, were to do some type of extraction for blood transfusion that was an extraterrestrial reverse technology and was used for good in terms of helping people in Vietnam. So that's pretty wild. And let's see here. There's still so much more. Let's see if we can wrap this up in the next 3 minutes here. Okay. And he says that we know of at least 4 other extraterrestrial races with whom we've been in contact with, allegedly, according to Commander Graham Bethune, allegedly the Pleiadians, the Orionites, the Lyrans, and the Greys. And the ETs warned us not to do certain things. For example, not to bring weapons to a meeting. And apparently the U.S. broke that advice and did bring weapons, and it exploded, which started a battle that ended in 22 extraterrestrial and 39 human deaths. We never understood exactly what made the ammunition explode, but they had warned us and we didn't listen. It was probably their personal force fields that set off the ammunition. So again, either just someone making this up, or maybe this is the kind of information we eventually get out. Some of these stories that have been just behind the scenes as these wild alternative reality secret history, that maybe things like this actually happen, which would just be wild. He goes on to say, I will stand on this fact. I have never read in any government file or document within the intelligence agencies that an ET ever deliberately hurt a human being, not once. I can see only the good they have done and why they have come. So he clearly has a bias in that sense, and maybe he's being honest and he never did read a document, but maybe because he didn't read documents of where there may have been some more negative things going on. And he says the main question the government has asked them is, quote, what did you come here to do? And unfortunately, the government has its own plans for its citizens in the world, and this does not coincide with what the extraterrestrials want. That is why they will disclose their presence if the government attempts to continue the veil of secrecy. So I wonder about that, if that's true, and we'll see. We're living in an interesting time right now. They go on to speak about unconditional love being, powerful and allowing people to move to higher dimensions. He mentions theosophy here. You wonder how much is influence from those kind of older theosophical traditions. And yeah, he kind of just spirals out into different things here. But anyway, at the very nuts and bolts sense here, apparently there was a 1989 crash retrieval in the Kalahari Desert of South Africa. And a full intact craft was recovered and 2 beings that were alive. Who knows? But anyway, interesting to review this with you here today. And let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.